I want to talk a little bit before we part. I want to talk a little bit about this idea about orphan wisdom.
Okay.
It really, when I first heard of your school and orphan wisdom, I have to say I conjured up a little bit of a different idea about that than when I heard you say it in your own words. And when I heard you say it in your own words, it was far more meaningful than what the idea I had conjured up. And I also think that at a time like this, in a place like Canada, where we're in this truth and reconciliation process, and where we've got this history that we need to heal,
yes,
that this orphan wisdom you speak of is an important facet of how we might come through this.
I've never heard anybody make the connection in overt ways you just have done, and I feel very complimented that you've done so. Thank you for imagining that there could be some minor part to, for what I'm talking about to play in that situation that you've described. Well, I can tell you, first of all, that the phrase came to me simply as something that could stand in as a kind of shorthand, how should I put it, reckoning of what I imagined myself to be on about. Like everybody else, I kind of discovered what I was doing after I'd been doing it for a while. It was not that apparent to me that I was on about anything in particular. Never mind that it had a name and finally a website and all the other doodah that it's gathered over the years. And the reason I chose it is twofold. First of all, if I say the word orphan to you, chances are, and I ask you, how do we come by orphans? The typical response is, well, they have no parents. Well, of course, there's no such thing as you have no parents. The very facts of your face are a sign that you certainly did have parents. So you don't have an out clause there. Of course, what we're saying, there is such a thing as orphanhood, but it's not never having had parents. It's from where you are and from how you are, you cannot have a kind of direct access to your parents from here, from this. Okay, so I've always been talking about something like the dominant culture of North America. I make no claim that anything I'm talking about is relevant to any other people or any other continent or any other race or anything of the kind. There are some people who decide otherwise, but I'm not encouraging that. I know something about where I should say lucky enough to have been born. And I do consider myself as a Canadian enormously fortunate. And I think that fortune confers upon me something like a responsibility. That I'm not just on the take where my good fortune is concerned. And this enterprise of mine is one attempt by me to deliver on the kind of obligation that seems to come with the territory of being lucky enough to have grown in a country such as this. So, orphan then does not mean you don't come from anywhere. I'm talking about, let's get down to it here. I'm some people would refer to me easily and glibly as a white man or another white man. And well, I understand the designation. I'm not pretending that it's not out there, but I simply raise the question, if there's such a thing as white people, I wonder where the white homeland is that we all come from originally. And what's the white language, I wonder? And what's the white religion? And what's the white moral order and so on? You start to wonder about it. It breaks down pretty quickly. So I've used the phrase, talking with you, the dominant culture of North America. That's composed of an awful lot of quote unquote white folks. That's true. But if I look around us, I'm still on the orphan part here. If I look around this hurt part of the world that I'm lucky enough to know something about, and I wonder where the hurt comes from, it seems to me a lot of the flailing around is recognizable as a kind of attribute or even a symptom of a deep sense of not being at home, of not knowing how to belong fundamentally, that we literally and in every other way foul our own nest, that I remember a gorgeous songwriter originally from Montreal who died last fall, whose name I won't say because he's so recently dead, but you know who I'm talking about. International star and one of our finest products in this country. And he said, any legitimate culture recognizes the legitimacy of other cultures. That's one of its hallmarks. A real culture recognizes the reality of other cultures. And then you ask yourself, this dominant culture of North America, what other cultures does it recognize as being legitimate? Not envy, recognize. Not plunder, honor. And I don't see that happen. So it seems to me that you either chalk this up to, well, that's the way white people are, or you begin to come much closer to the deeply unwelcome possibility that all of that migration 200 or 300 years ago or more, that was allegedly about the likes of anybody who looks like me and perhaps like you, trying to better their lot and further their deal and all of that kind of thing. And the unfortunate and, say inconvenient discovery that there were people here, but they weren't really people and they weren't really here, and they didn't need the whole place anyway. And, the whole sordid history that I'm referring to, all of that might not be a sign of mastery and, remarkable moral intelligence. That might be a sign of a kind of degree of lostness and frantic flight from what they no longer could bear, known as Europe. That might be the founding story of the kind of the unauthorized history of North America. This is why I've used the word orphan to characterize what I'm trying to, frankly, take on. Now to come to the second word. That sounds like a very grim characterization if I stop there, and it is. And there's grimness in it, that's certainly true. But it strikes me that the legitimate other half of the story is this: that there is not an extinction of wisdom that's a consequence of that kind of migration, that kind of spontaneous flight from the motherland or the homeland or what have you. But the enormous responsibility of the current generations, it seems to me, is to learn this wisdom. I don't know why it is that prejudices can be passed down with the breast milk, but wisdom seems to escape every generation that does not pursue it. I don't pretend I have an explanation for that, but it does strike me as true that prejudices can be inherited, but wisdom seems to have to be learned. So if you put the two things back together, orphan wisdom is an enterprise that imagines that there is a wisdom that now must be learned, that has to come from the troubles that we're in, that can't be magically, flown in from the Amazon or from Tibet. God bless them all for the wisdoms that they've managed for themselves. But it seems to me that we've plundered plenty, and I would say long enough. And it would be time now to learn our poverties rather than plundering someone else's wisdom tradition.
Yep, I agree. And we didn't, I'm Scottish, Norwegian, Swedish in the lines, but 2 and 3 generations removed, and we don't have much. By the time I came along, we didn't have much left of tradition, of depth, cultural depth, ritual, other than what Christianity had brought.
Well, probably, your folks agreed to quote unquote be from here after a while. They had a hyphenated identity for a little while, as many recent immigrants tend to have. And the grandchildren of the people who came over, who are they to themselves? And who are these strange grandparents to them? They bear no resemblance to the people they go to school with. They have strange food, strange smells, strange accent. And the grandchildren seem to have no hankering after that from which the grandparents come. So it is, in some respects, it's an old story. And it is certainly the recent wound of the dominant culture of North America, just as you described it. But it's not the same thing as saying there's nothing. And this is what I'm, making the deep plea on behalf of, that for us to agree that we come from nothing is basically to make the case for the white supremacy thing that is now rising yet again on this friggin' continent. That they're making a case for this noble ancestry, and drawing the kids in significant numbers. I mean, it concerns me at least. And white supremacy is a sign of a poverty that's unwilling to learn itself. And so it invents a noble history that it doesn't want to know the real history. It wants to have a history and not learn one. You see, I'm not saying it's not understandable. I'm saying it's another symptom. It's not a solution.
Mm-hmm.